Their companies. My name is Katie Burke. I'm the VP of Culture and Experience at Hubspot, which is a marketing software company just across the river. My title sounds made up because it is. We're trying to figure out how to make culture a competitive advantage globally as we grow, and that includes spreading culture around the world and rethinking how companies live and work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do things. We're constantly improving, constantly growing. So I'll tell you a little bit about where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed. All right. How many people in the room went to some form of preschool, kindergarten, any form of elementary school education? Fantastic. It was great. And when you showed up, chances are they were able to cover sort of the basic rules of the road of what you needed to know with roughly 4 to 6 rules. Maybe your kindergarten was like super advanced, you had 8, but like that was sort of the outer limits. Keep your hands to yourself, be nice to people, share your toys, all that kind of stuff. Kind of a universal rule, right? Most preschool or kindergartens manage to get by with, less than 10 fingers worth of rules. And yet, when you come down to public companies, most companies' rule books and rules and regulations look a little like this. And similar to what Heather said about filling out paperwork, most people don't want to start their new job and be told the 9 million things that they can't do in a very short list. So at HubSpot, we're trying to think very differently about what it looks like to be an employee at HubSpot. And the foundation of what it means to be an employee at HubSpot is rooted in transparency and autonomy. So I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, but when I tell people that I run culture at HubSpot, I'm going to talk a little bit about what they think it is and what it actually is. So here's what people think my job actually includes. Printing wall posters, throwing awesome perks and punking people with great pranks, which I'm very good at, but that's not the point. Or talking about corporate governance and again, wagging a finger and telling people what they can't do. Here's what we think culture is. Just ignore the slide arrow on the bottom, but basically it's a bar for what's possible at your company. It's a powerful weapon in the war for talent. So we're all competing for great talent. Boston's tide is rising significantly. We're getting amazing people here, but all of us are competing at some point for great talent, including some of the great talent in this room. We really think our culture is our most competitive weapon as we think about attracting people to work at HubSpot. We also think about our culture as a proactive catalyst to make better decisions. So part of onboarding new employees and trusting them to make great decisions is empowering them with how we think about our culture so that they can make those choices when they join our engineering team, our customer service team, that sort of thing. Culture is underestimated as a promise to your customers. So Heather talked a little bit about how Constant Contact does it, which I think is super awesome. One of the core values of HubSpot is solving for the customer, and we live and breathe and bake that into every single instance of how we interact with employees. And finally, it's collective clarity on what it means to be a HubSpotter. So my hope is that when you see someone bleeding orange or wearing a HubSpot t-shirt out in the universe, and you ask them what it's like to work at HubSpot, they will tell you why it's amazing and do cartwheels and backflips. That's sort of our goal for how people think about working at HubSpot. But they can also tell you why they're proud to work here. And hopefully there'll be some common themes across teams, departments, and locations. This is sort of our high level of how we think about this. This is our co-founder, Dharmesh, along with his Twitter handle, as he's more commonly known, because he's a super introvert, so he does not do any of our new hire trainings. He would prefer that I talk to humans and he stay behind a computer. Our whole vision is that culture is to recruiting as product is to marketing. And the whole thesis is that you can't get great customers in the door, they'll leave if you don't have an amazing product. Same thing with recruiting and culture. So one of the mistakes that people think about is they think our culture code is a great marketing document that gets people in the door, then we lock them in and don't tell anyone what happens. We would have massive attrition problems if that happened. Culture is a daily event at HubSpot and something we spend an inordinate amount of time, money, and energy thinking about. So this is sort of the core fundamentals of how we think about culture at HubSpot. You may be familiar with our culture code deck. It's amassed about 2 million views at this point. And this brings me to my most important point, which is if how you talk about culture starts the day the employee starts, it's too late. So we talk about culture very early on. If you're in our recruiting process, you're screened for culture fit very early on. You're asked if you read the deck. You're asked what your favorite part of the deck was. So rather than starting on day one talking to employees about why they love our culture, we start way, way earlier. We educate our customers, our partners, any of our candidates about what the HubSpot culture is like and what to expect, and most importantly, what not to expect. So one of the things we're really explicit about is we are fast-paced and adaptable. You have to be able to pivot at the drop of the hat and change directions. You have to be engaged by impossible challenges. If that's not a fit for you, we might not be the best place for you to work. And so I think codifying your culture is as important for the people it keeps at an arm's length as the people it brings in. So where do most companies go wrong? Waiting until employees arrive is a huge mistake we see all the time. Asking new employees to absorb the culture. So one of the things that's always funny to me about onboarding is it sounds like you're coming aboard a ship You submit your papers, you were told where to go, what to do, and how to have fun. That to me doesn't work. So again, going back to the concept of preschoolers, most adults want to figure out how they want to impact the organization, where their personality fits in, that sort of thing. So one of the things we encourage people to do as part of our commitment to autonomy is speak up when we're not doing a good job, and also speak up about where we can do better. So our best employees don't just follow our culture, they impact and change it on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, not giving employees a tool to speak up. So I was clapping in the back when Heather mentioned the notion of assuming that no questions is a good thing and that you're doing fine. We assume the exact opposite. So we use a Net Promoter Score to measure employee happiness at every juncture, and that includes our new hires. So we had a new hire class start this week. I got an email from one of them saying, there must be a mistake, I just got the employee happiness survey, and I haven't been here long enough to know if I'm happy or not. And I was like, well, trust me, if we really botched your day one, you would know, and I want to hear about it. So yes, and he was like, well, I don't get to answer all the questions though. Like, you get to answer all the questions. And he was like, well, what about if it's a really small complaint? I'm like, those really small complaints are the difference between your decision to stay here for 5 years and your decision to stay here for 5 months. So tell me what it is. He's like, honestly, the bathrooms were a little messy, back to Heather's point. These are all champagne first-class problems. But you know what? It's really important. Nailing the details is incredibly important. And more importantly, giving that employee the voice and the open ear to actually do something about something he observed that could be improved is really paramount. So for us, we think about talking about culture early and often. It's a huge part of our process, it's a huge part of our hiring process, but it's also a huge part of that first 90 days. So like a lot of the other teams, we bring in execs. There's an exec host class, so I'm the sponsored class for April. I'm already getting fired up for all the things I'm gonna do for my host class. But basically every one of our execs is measured with a host class so that you get an exec, that you have their ear, you have a direct line to them, all that kind of good stuff. We also provide a mentorship program. We also provide a buddy program. We also get our hiring managers super involved. The first day when people pick everyone up for lunch, it looks like a camp outing, which is hilarious, and I always love. But again, providing a vehicle for employees to speak up is absolutely critical. One of the things we were encouraged to share is how we actually do it. So what are the nuts and bolts? For us, culture is a business priority. It's not an HR priority. So to Heather's point about kind of bringing up how we think about putting culture front and center, it's not relegated to our HR team. It's a business issue. We use stories and examples to reinforce our culture. So part of being committed to not making rules and regulations for everything is letting employees mess up every once in a while. One of the things we could do is an employee messes up, we create a rule to make sure it never happens again. Well, guess what? Enron had a lot of rules and regulations, and guess what happened to them? They didn't fail because of a lack of rules and regulations. They failed because of a lack of accountability to those rules and regulations. So we use stories instead. We have a sales rep who, I'm not gonna out his mistake, but let's just say he made a mistake and he didn't follow our 3-word policy for pretty much anything, which is use good judgment. That individual we could have let go. And instead we decided he's super charismatic, super interesting, and really good at his job. So instead, we make him come and talk to the new hires. And what he talks about is his job and why he loves HubSpot, but he talks in detail about the error he made in judgment, what it was like calling his family to tell them what it was like and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things we encourage people to do is rather than cast stones and kind of look at him and be like, oh, I would never do that, think about the humanity of his experience. And one of our core values is humility. So being able to get up there and say, I messed up, here's what it felt like, here's what it looked like, here's what I did, and I'm standing before you asking you to share that. Similarly, when our execs botch a decision or do something wrong, we talk about it. So we have something called a failure forum where we talk about what failure felt like and what that looked like, or we do wiki posts on where I went wrong on a big decision. All those things foster stories to help people learn. We really want people to swing for the fences. And if you want grand slams, you have to be okay with strikeouts. We actively encourage the strikeouts, not only as part of the onboarding process, but every day at HubSpot. Third, we share as much information as humanly possible. So similar to both Acquia and Constant Contact, we have a huge belief in transparency. So on the first day, our interns can see our board decks, they can see our financials, they can see our customer retention numbers. Now this may make the lawyers in the group a little antsy. I can see some people starting to squirm a little bit. But again, part of the fundamental concept of trust is encouraging people to use that information for good and to use it to solve for our customers. I already mentioned the mistakes. We default to sharing pretty much everything. And then the final thing is we're never at rest with how we're doing with the candidate and employee experience. So the way that we measure our employee experience is quarterly. I mentioned through the ENPS survey. We share the results with everyone in the company. So one of the things that happens with most employee surveys is that they disappear, never to be seen again. HR does something with them, maybe presents to the execs, but employees don't know if their suggestions were even read. I spend 1 weekend every quarter, it's painful and awful, and I basically lock myself in a room, but reading every single comment. Still to this day, we have 1,100 employees in 5 locations. I read every single one. And we create a heat map that's based on a very scientific methodology. How many people have been to a Thai restaurant before? You know the chilies they use to represent how hot something is? Those are the chilies we use to represent how hot an issue is in HubSpot. So basically, let's say, for example, people are concerned about first-time managers. So first-time managers have a lot of great things about them, including eagerness and excitement. They also have a lot of challenges in that they avoid difficult conversations like the plague. And so one of the things we do is help understand what's going wrong. Any first-hand experiences? I see some nods in the room. We have a lot of them, so we're living that firsthand. So one of the things we do is ask employees what that's looking like and identify patches, and then we share the action plan. So I'm held accountable every 3 months for how I did against that action plan by all of our employees. Just to give you a context of how granular our employees go, we had a company meeting in November. We post questions that we can't get to on our wiki, and our execs answer them. There were 22 questions. 1 was missing, and I got an email today saying you forgot a question. That's just how granular people take it and how seriously people take it, and I love it. It's the nth degree of accountability, and we really embrace it. So this is sort of how we think about it, rinse, repeat. One tactical example that I wanted to share was we have a great internal newsletter called The Win, the weekly internal newsletter. That's amazing. We created a custom edition just for new hires. So they get a custom edition that welcomes them by name, welcomes them by class, includes core information that might be relevant to them, and kind of really personalizes the experience. So again, to everyone's point about kind of not drinking from the fire hose, this provides snackable content that they can kind of digest when they're relatively new and absorb it all. The 3 keys to our HubSpot onboarding experience are really content, context, and community. So really making people feel like they belong using those 3 tools. The other thing I would say is we hire a little bit unconventionally. So my team includes, our culture team is 8 people. It includes 2 people from the hospitality industry, and that's very intentional. I didn't hire trained HR professionals who are very trained on here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it, that sort of thing. I hired people who told me about the guest that they followed all the way to New York to get him back their suitcase. I hire people who say, I comped a meal for someone because there was an allergy issue or because his or her son got sick. That's the type of people that I want to work with on a day-to-day basis, and that's the type of employee experience we want to create. So we hire very unconventionally as it relates to all things HubSpot. And finally, I wouldn't be doing my job running culture if there's someone amazing that you know who should work here, or if you have comments, questions, HubSpotters you've met in the wild that you like or that we could have done better. Here's my email and information. Happy to chat afterwards or to take questions at the break as well. Thanks, Mike.